This Side of Paradise was written by F. Scott Fitzgerald in 1920 and was his debut novel. The novel centers around Amory Blaine and follows him from when he is a young child to when he reaches his early 20s. From the beginning, Amory has quite a big ego. He's rich, attractive, smart, and he knows it. As a young boy, Amory attends St. Regis Prep School, but later goes on to study at Princeton. He starts off at the top of his class academic-wise, but as the years go on, he starts to care less and less about his classes. He spends his time partying, messing around with girls, reading books, debating with friends, and writing lots of poetry. World War I starts, and Amory leaves Princeton to join the military. While he is gone, his mother dies, and when Amory returns, he is running pretty low money-wise. Soon after returning home, Amory meets Rosalind, his friend's sister, and they fall deeply in love. We'll discuss her in more depth later, but essentially she breaks Amory's heart, sending him into a month of drunken despair. When he finally recovers, he moves to the countryside and meets another girl, Eleanor, who we'll also touch on later. Amory is fascinated by her, but after a few months he decides to move back to the city. By now, Amory is pretty much penniless. He becomes depressed and does a lot of contemplating about life and his past. He catches a ride from a rich man, and they have an interesting conversation about politics, in which Amory declares himself a socialist. The book ends with an emotionally distraught Amory returning to Princeton and looking up at the stars. Many argue that this book is semi-autobiographical of Fitzgerald's own life. He has many similarities to Amory. He went to Princeton, fought in the war, ended up poor, and got his heart broken. Fitzgerald fell in love with a woman named Zelda when he returned from war. However, she would not marry him because he was too poor. So, Fitzgerald, determined to get her back, wrote this book in an attempt to get rich and famous. After publication, he became successful and Zelda married him. This backstory is essential to understanding Amory and many of the plot events in the story. It is also important to remember that this novel takes place during the 1920s, a time where status, wealth, and tradition were very important. This will play into Amory's decisions as well as those around him. Now let's discuss Fitzgerald's style in the novel. Although the book is mostly written in prose, it also includes poems, letter, and even a short section written in play format. Keep in mind this is Fitzgerald's first novel, so he may have been playing around a bit. But this change in format could also reflect the fact that Amory is also a writer, and it is meant to embody his experiences as he grows up. The novel is beautifully written and filled with descriptive imagery, metaphors, and personification. A perfect example of this takes place on page 31 when Fitzgerald writes, "The violins swelled and quavered on the last notes. The girls sang to a crumpled butterfly on the stage. A great burst of clapping filled the house. Oh, to fall in love like that, to the languorous magic melody of such a tune." The diction is extravagant and elevated throughout the whole story. Basically, it sounds like a teenage boy trying to sound deep and brooding, just like Amory. But also keep in mind that Fitzgerald essentially wrote this book to impress Zelda, which also explains the elegant writing style. In the novel, Amory has 4 main love interests: Isabel, Clara, Rosalind, and Eleanor. Isabel and Clara aren't super important to the plot, although Amory is infatuated with them for a short amount of time. Let's focus first on Rosalind. She is beautiful, rich, confident, and extremely conceited. She was the love of Amory's life, and he even wanted to marry her. Rosalind and Amory are very similar in the sense that they both had a very spoiled upbringing, but are overall very sensitive and thoughtful people. But in the end, Rosalind dumps Amory because he does not have enough money for her liking. Rosalind is also extremely similar to Fitzgerald's own lover, Zelda, who left Fitzgerald because he didn't have enough money. Amory's last love interest in the novel is Eleanor, who serves as sort of a rebound after Rosalind. She is mysterious, quirky, and fun, and Amory really likes her. Much like Amory, Eleanor also comes from a wealthy family, but decides to not conform to the typical upper-class lifestyle in order to follow her own free spirit. Amory and Eleanor end up having a short summer fling, but after a few months, Amory decides to move back to the city. Now I'm going to read a short passage from the end of the novel. He wondered that graves ever made people consider life in vain. Somehow he could find nothing hopeless in having lived. All the broken columns and clasped hands and doves and angels meant romances. He fancied that in 100 years he would like having young people speculate as to whether his eyes were brown or blue, and he hoped quite passionately that his grave would have about it an air of many, many years ago. It seems strange that out of a row of Union soldiers, 2 or 3 made him think of dead loves and dead lovers. This passage demonstrates the main theme that pride in a large ego will cause an unfulfilling life. As seen in this passage, Amory still thinks life revolves around him, as he says he wants people to wonder about him even when he's dead. But at the end of this novel, Amory is depressed, penniless, and lost. During Amory's youth, he thought he was the best, and that everything would come easy to him. When this proved to be untrue, he struggled to keep up with life, but still keeps his big ego, causing him to make bad decisions and often be unresponsible. And although by the end of the story it seems as if Amory has realized how his pride has hindered him, it may be too late for him to regain success, and he finishes the story by declaring, "I know myself, but that is all."